There are four methods of measuring the elasticity of demand. They are the percentage method, the point method, arc method, and expenditure method, where the price and quantity matches. That's where the demand gets satisfied. If it is going down, the expenditure should also go down. When the price goes up, then automatically the expenditure with that product will also start going up. Good morning and welcome to the session 3 in Business Decision Theories in Unit 1, where we are going to talk about the methods of measuring the price elasticity of demand. Moving further, when we had spoken about demand and the importance of demand in the previous sessions, now we are trying to get closer to the demand factor, trying to understand how to measure the elasticity. Why? Because when we talk about measuring elasticity, we are talking about a point-to-point measurement. We're talking about a range altogether. Now, let's say that the price is anywhere between 50 to 100 rupees. This is the range which I am quoting. So that means the price has got a bandwidth altogether. So if you are the consumer, you always want to see price as a range oriented system. You do not believe in fixed price. That's what every customer believes. Moment you go into any of the shop or moment you go into any of the shopping malls altogether, you want to see the range at which a product is being priced. You don't want to believe in just fixed price. You don't want to see one tag which is being telling that it's 4,999 only. So you want to have a range. So that is why we are very much interested in measuring the elasticity of demand. We want to see to what extent the customer wants to stretch and take forward the pricing mechanism. Now, there are four methods of measuring the elasticity of demand. They are the percentage method, the point method, arc method, and expenditure method. So we have percentage, point, arc, and expenditure method. So let's try to understand, analyze each one of this method so that you will be able to understand and appreciate the elasticity of demand. Moving further, the percentage method. Percentage is one thing that is very, very interesting in our life. Why? Because we are all numeric or number-oriented personality. Moment if somebody comes and tells to you that the price of mobile phones have gone up by 10%, the price of petrol has gone up by 5%, the price of gold has gone up by 20%, all these are percentages. They are not actual values. They're just percentages, but they mean a lot because people start getting into the calculative mode altogether. So that's why the percentage method is a very, very interesting method. The price elasticity of demand is measured with the price elasticity in terms of percentage, which is given by EP. That's the price elasticity. The coefficient is being measured in this way: percentage change in quantity by percentage change in the price factor. That this is the most important thing that you have to learn in the formula. Percentage change in the quantity divided by percentage change in the price. That is very, very important factor altogether. Let's try to understand this. Whenever you buy a Dettol soap and you see a nice advertisement at the corner of the wrapper on the soap, 25% extra. You buy a Saffola masala oats and they say 20% extra. What is that they are trying to tell? They are trying to say that the quantity has changed. For the same price, you are getting extra 10%, 20%, 25%. So interesting, people are interested to buy. When you see a Dabur honey and they say that 10% extra, people are interested in buying it. Why? Because percentage change in quantity, they are not knowing the actual value. They just want to know the percentage value. So percentage wise, it has increased at the same price. But then for all the companies, they are not going to give anything for free. Let's understand that basic point. Nobody is going to give you a free lunch. Everybody is going to charge you for what you're going to do. So this percentage change in quantity is going to come with a percentage change in price. That's how you will be able to measure the price elasticity of demand. Why? Because whenever there is a percentage change, an increase in quantity, an increase in price factor, people want to know this, whether at the same price, are you giving me something extra, or at a price which is slightly elated, slightly increased. That is what people are interested to know. The concept of this price elasticity is very important in the modern walk of life, in the modern day of life. Why? Because every customer wants to know the reality between what is existing and what is expected. So that is where the question of existence versus expectation starts coming into picture. Everybody wants to get the maximum value in terms of the minimum payment. When I pay 10 rupees, I want to get the maximum return out of that 10 rupees, and that can be measured using the change in quality in terms of quantity and the price factor. So this is a very, very important thing that's what we see in the market on a day-to-day basis. So moment people start saying that, let's say even when we go to a fruit seller on the road, and when he says that, sir, by paying an extra another 5 or 10 rupees, I'll give you another half a kg or a quarter kg more, automatically what happens? The price elasticity comes into picture. So when people say that, sir, 1 kg of a particular thing, let's say that 1 kg of mango is 100 rupees, but if you are ready to extend it by another 10 or 20 rupees and you are able to bargain and get another 1 or 2 mangoes, the quantity is increased because of a small increase in the price factor. So that is where price elasticity matters a lot. It's a very, very important concept that determines the day-to-day buying and purchasing habits of the consumer. Moving further, the point method. Alfred Marshall devised a geometrical method for measuring the elasticity at a point on the demand curve. So let's try to understand how does this work altogether. If this is the demand curve where I'm going to put the price and the quantity, and this is the demand curve that is sloping downwards, he tries to talk about a point on the demand curve altogether, which says that very clearly that this is how we are trying to understand, and this is how we are trying to come to an equilibrium position altogether. So we are trying to understand the factor that this particular point where the demand, which comes to an equilibrium point between the price factor and quantity factor, gives the situation, the equilibrium point where the consumer is ready to spend and take his maximum demand factor in a conclusive manner. So what do I mean by saying here is that where the price and quantity matches, that's where the demand gets satisfied. This is a very, very important factor. Why? Because one side, when price is being given to you in a range format, the other side, quantity also has to start shifting. So when we come back to the economics of pricing and demand altogether, which are very closely related, what happens is that consumer comes to a bargaining position with the seller, trying to find out what would be the best point, what would be the maximum value that can be derived so that both of us arrive at a win-win situation. For the seller, it is also profit that is very important. For the buyer, it is the maximum value gain. So both of them have to come to a win-win situation, and that's where the point method actually tries to come in, where they try to balance in terms of price and quantity. Moving further, let's try to talk about the arc method altogether. What is this arc method? We have studied the measurement of elasticity at a point on a demand curve, what we saw in the previous slide. But when elasticity is measured between 2 points of the demand, it becomes an arc altogether. So let me again put this for you. Let me say that I'm taking the price here and quantity here, and let me put this diagram. Now, if there are two factors, let me say here and here. Now, there are two factors here, so let me put this as point E1 and E2. Now, what happens here is that there is an arc that is formed here. You would see that the formation is something like this. So you would be able to see that an arc formation coming in, which means to say that there are possibilities of multiple points. That's why Professor Baumol says that arc elasticity is a measure of average responsiveness to the price change exhibited by the demand curve over the stretch of the curve. That means now we are going to talk about sum of averages. So I would say that E1 plus E2 plus E3. So like this, it is possible to go with multiple points on the same demand curve. Now, why is this possible is that if I come back to the ground reality, there are multiple points at which the customer might get satisfied. There are multiple points of bargaining and multiple points of resolution that you will be able to get on the demand curve. So you follow an arc method. You say that very, very clearly. Now, following the total outlay method or the expenditure method that was proposed by the great economist Alfred Marshall, where he goes and says Marshall evolved the total outlay, the total revenue, or the total expenditure method. Now coming to the fourth method altogether, where we are trying to talk about the total expenditure method. Now, what is that method all about? It is about understanding that comparing the total expenditure of purchaser both before and after change in price, it can be known whether his demand for a good is elastic unity or less elastic altogether. So the total outlay is nothing but a price that is multiplied into quantity demanded. Now let's try to understand this entire exercise in a very, very simple manner through a common example. Moment you take a shopping list and you go to the shop, what you tend to do is that you tend to put a budget in your mind. You have a figure in your mind which you don't want to disclose. This is what your mind has accepted and this is what is your expectation. So you go to the shop, you complete the shopping, you come out with the bill, you're going to the counter to pay the money. Now when you look at the bill, if the amount is matching your expectation in the mind, then the total expenditure is matching. That means you are well within the range, your entire outlay, your entire purchase expenditure methodology is fine. So you don't have to think further. But if your value is increasing, suppose the budget that I had in my mind was 5,000 and the bill that came was 5,800 or 6,200. Automatically now what is happening is that it is exceeding my budget, it is exceeding the total expenditure altogether. So now what is happening is that it is not perfectly elastic for me. Now what happens is that it is beyond the elasticity. When I exactly match the total of the total expenditure, no need to worry. But if it goes below or goes above, that means there will be a fluctuation in my mind. 99% of the time it will never go below, it will always exceed our budget, because that's what happens when we tend to go on a shopping spree. But then what happens here is that, as discussed by Marshall, he says very, very clearly that now the consumer comes to the price elasticity, measuring it whether it is perfectly elastic or it is less elastic or more elastic in nature. So what is the stretchability point that comes into in terms of expenditure? That's what we need to understand. This is the common ideology or the method that was followed by all the families in India who always believed in the concept of the middle class income group. Why? Because they always believed that there needs to be a perfect budgeting and you do not have to exceed that budget. You have to stick within the budget. That's how the total expenditure for the family can be controlled. So this expenditure method is a very, very powerful method which actually tries to understand the consumer in a very, very close niche manner altogether, because that exactly tells you how much are you flexible in nature in terms of exceeding your budget, going on an expansion mode or are on a restriction mode altogether. Now, moving further, the elastic demand altogether. What is elastic demand all about? Demand is elastic when with the fall in price, the total expenditure increases, and with the rise in price, the expenditure decreases. Quite a simple statement and a philosophy altogether, because we have understood demand, which is inversely proportional to the price factor. When the price increases, demand falls, and when the price decreases, demand goes up. So automatically, demand is also something which is very elastic, which tries to say that with a fall in price, the expenditure will increase, and with a rise in price, the total expenditure will decrease. It is quite nominal. Why? Because for the consumer, what he tries to do is that he always wants to play within the range, play within a limit. He doesn't want to go on an unlimited budget. Every single resource for a consumer today in the market is a limited resource. You cannot expect something to be on the higher side. You cannot expect something to be on the unlimited version altogether. So what happens in the long run is that moment there is a fall in price, the consumer is excited. He wants to spend more. He wants to go out of his budget. He goes and explains that to every single person, trying to say that, yes, I have money with me which I can spend now. Moment there is a rise in price, his budget gets restricted. He is completely tied up. So automatically what happens? He tries to squeeze down. He tries to pull down the entire price. So which means what happens is that he will not be able to go further on the purchasing mode. So that's why demand is a very, very fantastic thing. It's highly elastic in nature. It tells how you need to spend and how much you need to restrict yourself. Moving further, the unitary elastic demand. The word itself is very simple. Unitary, which means single. So what happens with a fall or rise in price, the total expenditure remains unchanged. The price of elasticity of demand is unity, which means to say that in one simple way, whatever happens, it remains one constant line. That's all. I'm not going to change here. Whatever happens with the rise or fall in price, the demand curve remains the same. It is not changing here at any point of time. It is one single line. So what we are trying to understand is that the change factor is avoided. We are not going with the change. Unitary. It sticks on to one single value. Where is it possible? Sir, is unitary demand possible? Why? Because you had just now said that demand is elastic in nature. So where are we talking about the non-flexibility part? Now what I mean by saying a unitary demand is that which means price quantity when they are fixed, and you have no more options to change. And if it is an essential commodity, then automatically a unitary demand, elastic demand comes into picture. There are certain products in our daily walk of life where we have the price and quantity pretty much fixed. You cannot do anything about it. So what happens there is that a very simple factor, that is P into Q, price into quantity, which will directly give you a unitary demand. You are not shifting too much because you don't want too much of it or too less of it. You want exactly that same quantity month on month. So that's where we are talking about this unitary elastic demand. Moving further, less elastic demand. What is a less elastic? Which means to say that with the fall in price, the total expenditure falls, but with the rise in price, the total expenditure also rises up. Now look at the other way kind of factor. Less elastic, it will also the total expenditure falls. So it is directly proportional, what we are trying to say. Now when it rises, it will also rise altogether. Now what happens here is that there are products where you will see that they follow exactly the market trend. They are less elastic, which means they are not showing that amount of appreciation in the mind of the consumer. So what happens here is that whenever you look at certain goods where the price starts falling down, the consumer will also reduce his expenditure there, because he doesn't want to go with that good on a higher basis. But when the expenditure goes up, that is when the demand starts going up in certain prices of that product, again his expenditure will also fall up on the same category. Now why that is happening is that the mindset of the consumer sets with the trend of the market. He believes that if it is going down, the expenditure should also go down. When the price goes up, then automatically the expenditure with that product will also start going up. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the important factors that have been told in this session will be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming session, we are going to learn about the different factors in terms of supply and demand. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.